Hey, I'm Jeff Howland, and this is the second video that I'm doing for this series that I'm calling How to Human. And there's a few ways you could think about that series name, but I think the way that is probably the best way to think about it is we're all working on how to be human, how to be a good person, how to be a good human. Um, and this is my attempt at looking at how to do it and sharing my conclusions and processes and thoughts and things like that on that. So, the last video, I did my introduction of how I've chosen to believe in God, and just a choice doesn't require proof, and how it's really improved my life, and I really like it because it gives me better results than my previous model of being an atheist, which I actually was fine with and liked that plenty too. And I guess that's one of the interesting things about it is that I'm not coming from a position of being unhappy with my previous place as an atheist. I was completely happy with that model, and I was fine to live out my life and die and be dead forever and use my time well and think about how to be the most efficient with my life to get as far as I could, and my thing is in kind of skill building and getting better at things. And so that's what I like to do, and that's what I'm into, and it's what I've been doing, and I really like it, and I plan on continue doing it. And I was fine with all those things as an atheist. It was a great life I was having in a lot of ways. But then I encountered this information that I really liked, and I actually liked better than my other model. So my model as an atheist was not as enjoyable, and it actually made less sense to me. I had more questions as an atheist on what's going on and what's really true about the universe. And even with science, it's like the more I learned about our complete understanding of how we describe the universe scientifically, the more I began to question just how well we really know what's going on. Because in science, we're always coming up with new things that supersede old things. And so that's a good path for doing experimentation. It's smart. The scientific method is a genius stroke for humanity, and has been amazing at what we've been able to do following these rules. But what we get out of them is things that yield good effects, and not things that are true, because we take them to be true and we come up with a narrative about what they mean and how we would explain them. But really all we did was measure something. We did something and we measured something. And so we got an effect and we wrote it down, but then we had to come up with why that effect is true, and we came up with a narrative that explains it. And the narrative is what we believe. And so we believe things based on the narrative that we've constructed of the explanation of the results of the experiments. And so that is one step too far, in my opinion. So the fact that we believe the narrative that we make up, and it's not just the best narrative that we have now, we believe it is true. But what's going to happen is we're going to do a new experiment at some point in the future, and it's going to refine the results or contradict the results, because maybe the previous experiments weren't done correctly, or were done under some kind of condition that was not what we thought it was. And lots of experiments have been this way. And one of the ones that I like to use as an example is neurogenesis, where we create brain cells. And when I was growing up, it was known that basically after you were 8 or 10 years old, somewhere in kind of pre-teenager kind of years, your brain would basically stop growing new neurons, and it wouldn't grow them anymore in the future. Maybe it would slow down, and then at some point it would stop growing them. But when you're in your adult years, it was assumed you would just lose neurons and you would never create them. And this was a known fact. Everybody knew this. It was just true. It was scientifically true that you were only going downhill and you would never create new neurons. And then I believe sometimes in the 90s, I forget when, they did a study where they found neurons growing. So they got a different result than the first study, or the first series of studies that said that neurons didn't grow. And this result was changed by the fact that the people in the study for whether brain cells grow were given something that they found interesting. And finding it interesting, suddenly they're growing new brain cells. And now we contradicted that previous scientific knowledge that everybody knew you wouldn't make new brain cells. And now we have new words like neuroplasticity, which is that your brain can change. It changes shape physically as the brain cells are created. It changes shape as the axons and dendrites connect, and you get new neural pathways, which happens all the time. And neural pathways break through atrophy all the time, depending on the usage. So it might be a lot less, and the growth might be a lot less too. It depends on how stimulated you are in terms of how you're stimulating yourself. And because just like in the studies, in the studies I had heard about in the 80s, you couldn't grow brain cells because they were bored. And so if you're bored now, you're not growing brain cells, and maybe you are getting a lot of atrophy. But if you're doing things that interest you now, then neurogenesis, we have proof. And this is a fact that changed in my lifetime, that we knew it was one way, and now we know it's a different way. And this is normal scientific progress. But the problem is we believe all kinds of things about the world and the universe and matter and energy and everything. And we can believe things such as there's no God because we understand electromagnetic force and quantum mechanics and relativity and fields and particles and all of this different stuff. And because we know what a lepton is and a muon and a boson, and we can give them magnetic or electrovolt charges and tell you different things about them, it's like that suddenly we can say that there's no God. And that's simply not true. It's like those things don't add up. It doesn't work. You can certainly say that some of the things that people have said about God don't seem to match reality or don't seem possible or anything like that, and that's true. You can say those things, and it's like that might be right, but that doesn't really mean that there can't be God. It's like that's what I grew up thinking, and it's what I thought until just recently when I chose not to. But now that I've chosen without any proof not to, and the reason I was able to choose that was because of the dilemma that I found myself in, that I really like science and I like learning all the cool stuff that people have learned, and the experiments obviously are yielding data, and that data means stuff, and we can interpret those meanings to understand things better. But when we take it too far and we think that we understand everything so well that we can tell you things that don't exist, so we're proving a negative, that is not something science can do. Because like the theoretical black swan, it's like it only takes seeing one black swan once to rule out that black swans don't exist. So that's why we say you can't prove a negative. And so saying that there isn't a God is trying to prove a negative, and you're trying to do it scientifically. It doesn't work. You're only making a rhetorical statement, and you're couching it in the fact that science doesn't prove there's a God. Like science hasn't put a spotlight on someone who's God. He's like, look at me, I'm God. Or science hasn't found the God particle, which then I guess would turn us into gods because we'd be able to use the magic particle or something to do magic-y stuff, and we could, it's like it's unknown what the results of this would be. The things that I could see as like scientific results would be like, we have anti-gravity. We have a thing, we understand gravity so well that we can turn gravity off or reverse things, and that allows us to do anti-gravity stuff. And I can see science coming up with like free energy things where we can just produce energy forever because there's like some 0-point energy, and if you know how to put a piece of wire in just the right way, then energy just comes out of it, and you can just turn the circuit on and it all works. And those things seem to be totally possible in science. We just don't know how to do them, and we're not sure if we'll ever be able to do them, but they seem possible. But to say that you can't do things really just shows that we don't understand, because every single scientific discovery we've ever had came right before all of previous scientific discoveries saying that thing was impossible. In almost all cases. And so like germs were impossible, and people, Louis Pasteur was a crazy person for talking about germs, and the head of the scientific institutes at the time were slandering him, and all kinds of other stuff because they didn't believe in that thing yet. And so they said it wasn't true, and they said it wasn't true scientifically, and they said all kinds of other stuff, and then they were wrong, and everyone prior to any discovery that was saying that they were right about everything prior to the discovery was wrong after the discovery. And so this leads me to know that the kind of modern scientific view on things is going to change yet again, because I've seen it plenty of times in my own lifetime, and that a lot of the things that we think we're right about, we're not right about. And we will find out through our own scientific discoveries that we're not right about them. And that is guaranteed to happen 100%. It's happened every single time before. It'll happen to everything until we hit something that we just can't see anymore. We can't discover anymore. Our tests are too large or too small, and we can't test the thing, and so we can't do anything about it, because there will always be refinement to any information that you get. There will always be a next level which tells you a greater curve. We have these ideas of like the constants, like Planck constant speed and Planck constant time, and maybe that's true, but we would never know, because all it means is that maybe there's a huge gap between where we're measuring and the next measurable spot to find out more information, which might be quite a ways smaller or larger, and we just can't reach it with our sensors, or can't make sense of it in any kind of way. And so we have this obvious limits to our ability to experiment with things based on what we can do. And if we can't experiment with things, we're just making stuff up. So it has to be experimental. We have to be able to kind of collect data out of actual experiments, or what are we doing? We're just hypothesizing, which is no different than making things up. It's like, so this has all led me to this dilemma with the scientific view, and so actually the view that there's a God makes a lot more sense. Everything makes sense if somebody just made it that way. If there was a creative force which basically says, I'm going to create, and this is what I'm going to create, and he makes all the stuff, and he makes it so we have DNA, and he makes it so there's atoms, and he makes it so they have, all these interesting charged things that they're doing and moving in different directions and having fields, and there's EMF and all this really cool stuff, and we've got EMF in us, and we've got all these chemicals in us, and the way proteins intersect with each other, and how the amino acids are tied up together to make us into this great code, and the enzymes that trigger them, and all the cool things that we have going on, heredity, and the ability to express genes in our own lifetime through our own efforts. It's like, this is all really cool stuff, and it works this way. And so the real point of this talk was to talk about the philosophy of pragmatism. Pragmatism is something that is often confused with practicality. So something being practical means it's efficient for the given situation. So if you have a pie and two people are hungry, you can cut the pie in half, and then two people can be fed, and that's a practical solution. A less practical solution would be there's a pie and there's two people that are hungry, and then they have to fight to the death to get the pie. That is not a practical solution to having one pie and two people, because the pie is easily dividable, and they're not going to starve to death, and if it's pie anyway, it's like some unnecessary thing. So practicality is just kind of an efficient solution, and it kind of is not even like highly efficient, like, because usually when you think of efficiency, you think about it being highly efficient. Practical is just kind of moderately efficient. It's a practical thing to do. Now, pragmatism, which people often confuse for practicality and things being a practical solution, pragmatism is a philosophy which says that you only measure something by the effects it has. You don't think about other kind of values, like whether you like it or whether it fits into some social norm or some kind of requirement that you have. You just look at it as the effects. What are the effects that this thing produces? And so it's limited in how you can use it, because it's dealing with actions that you can look at the effects of. And if something doesn't have an effect, if it's not an action that has an effect, then you can't look at it pragmatically. But most things do have some kind of correlation to this pragmatic thing, because things can do stuff, and you can do stuff about things, and so the pragmatism surrounds many, many things. So pragmatism is about effects, and so the reason that that's important for what I was just talking about is that the effects of believing in God being a good thing for me mean that it's a better thing than the previous good thing, which I was also fine with being an atheist. This is just better. And so looking at just the effects, it's better. And so when like my previous self would have questioned this and would have said, well, but is it true? Is it true that that God exists? And if you're believing something that isn't true, you're deluding yourself and you're misleading yourself and you're guiding yourself off the path, and that's not a good thing. And so that's how I would have seen that. And so knowing that, I can respond to that now, which is that if I look at it pragmatically, which is a tool that I liked then and I like now, I use it in my engineering work all the time, because it's very useful to disregard everything but the effects in engineering. Like, what if I do this thing, what effects do I get? And you think of all the effects, not just the ones you want, but the ones you don't want as well. And so that gives you a better comprehensive view on things, rather than if you only look at, like, do I get the results that I want? You might also not pay attention to the results that you really don't want, but weren't something that was important to you. When you look at the effects, you look at everything that happens, everything that's touched from some event occurring. And so when I look at the question of truth with regard to God existing, and I look at it by the effects, it's like I can see that my life is better, and I like living more, and I'm so more hopeful. Like, there's no reason to even hope about the future. The future will be better because we'll make it better. It's like we're awake enough now for me to be able to think about these things, and I know other people are thinking about these things, and so we're going to start doing things about it. And it's like believing in God and the subsequent things of believing in the type of immortality, in that we will go on past this life, whether we reincarnate or just go on to some other thing, that we continue because we're part of this system that has God, instead of just some pitiful multicellular creature that dies one day and rots, and that's it. And so that's a much more boring and not interesting viewpoint than the fact that I'm going to come back and like reincarnate, and I'll be able to be a child again, and I'll forget everything, and I'll have to learn all this stuff all over again. But imagine how great that could be if I left a much better world behind by working with other people that are like me to try to make a better world. And leave that behind. And so not only would my friends and family benefit, but it would benefit me coming back and reincarnating, and then I'd be clear of all the things that happened to me in this lifetime, and I'd be coming back to a new lifetime in a better world, and like, what an interesting life that might be in that time. And so that's a much more exciting thing to think of than this multicellular organism that seems to have some kind of consciousness and can talk about itself and think about itself. One day kicks the bucket and is ant food. And so less attractive proposal. And so thinking about this pragmatically, it's irrelevant whether it's true. It matters whether the effects are better, and the effects are better. And so the truth of it becomes not so important. And then thinking about my dilemmas with scientific problems before, and our complete trust and faith in their complete accuracy, leading us to understanding that we're multicellular organisms that are just going to die and rot. It's like, not a better deal. And because I am an engineer and look at things pragmatically, I have no fear of falling off the ability to track reality and to find good results. Because the interesting thing about reality is that reality is testable by everybody in the same way. Everybody has the same access to reality. Even if you're blind or deaf, or you have some other kind of disability sense-wise, it's like you still have access to the same reality. You have different systems being able to work to pick it up, but you still have access to the same reality. So you are experiencing the same reality as everyone else. We are all interpreting it differently. We all have different perspectives. We have different, we were raised differently. We speak different languages. We have different meanings for even the words that we use in common. We're all different. We're very different, and we can't even imagine what it's like to be another person. It's like even low levels of empathy are pretty hard when you can just realize what other people are going through and try to understand their perspective, and you seem to mean what they they say, and they seem to feel like you understand them, that's already a really, really hard thing. And so I think this thing about looking at things pragmatically allows me to move past being stuck in this analysis paralysis kind of thing of, is there a God? Can it be proved? Things like that. And so this pragmatism thing is pretty cool. I use it for a lot of stuff. And so let's see, I had a couple other points that I wanted to get here that I wrote down. So basically, this is something that is a proposal for people to think about. It's like, if you can use pragmatism in the way that it's meant to be used, and look at things only with their effects, you can really look at a lot of different models and compare them and see if they're better for you. And it's like, and if they're better for you, you should probably debate why you don't want to adopt them, because if you can find something better, you'll have better results. And it's like, the thing is, if you have a model that gives you poor results, but you think it's a true model, then the question is, why do you think it's true? Because if all results are based on how basically actions meet with reality, so how things work in the world are what yields results, and those effects, so results and effects being the same thing here. So if these effects that are being yielded from these actions you prefer, then why would the things that you prefer less not be true? And of course, you could say things like, well, what if people just wanted to do drugs all the time, and then they were completely out of it, but they preferred it, or have sex all the time, but they were couldn't have a real relationship, or were obviously being too animalistic or something like that. And it's like, because they're talking about these extremes of how people could be too extreme in some way. And of course, if you're to anything, then you're to that thing. It's like, by definition, you've gone too far. It's like, that's what that means. And so, of course, any argument can be kind of debased in this way by pointing out, like, what if something is too extreme? Well, it's like, well, then the answer is that thing is too extreme, and it should be done less, or those people are going to have to pay for that. And reality points that out too. But if you can look at the things pragmatically to see just what the effects are, and then you appreciate the effects better, is the thing that you think is true really true? Because reality is the ultimate arbitrator on what effects will be. And so reality, to me, is the ultimate arbitrator on truth. And so, for one thing, I can always say that I was religious about, religious about reality. I'm religious about the effects of interacting with reality and what reality is, and exploring it and understanding it and working with it, because when you work with it, amazing things happen. Things work well because you're paying attention to how reality is, and you get good results. It's like, you want to hit the nail. It's like, aim for where the nail is, and when you hit it right, the nail just goes right in. It's like, I write software. It's like, if I want the software to work, everything has to be perfectly integrated for that stuff to work, or it doesn't work. There's a bug, or it doesn't run, doesn't compile, something like that. So it's like, that kind of paying attention to how things work really pays off. And so, like, to me, that's always been a religious mantra, whether you're an atheist or agnostic, or you don't even care about it, non-theist or a theist, or what kind of a theist you are. It's like, it's reality is a great thing. And if there's a God made reality, and so he's probably big on reality too, or she, if you prefer that terminology. It's really cool to be able to find this stuff, and now I'm having a good time talking about it, and looking forward to talking about more of this stuff, just to kind of start dialogues with people, because I don't belong to a church, and I have no intention to join one, because the church things, one, they're just not really my thing. It's like, I've never been into that as just when I've gone. They've been fine, but not really for me. And then also, they don't really fit the way that I think about these things. So it'd be kind of just off all the time. And it might be nice to go sometimes with people, but that's not really my thing. But I would like to talk about doing good stuff. And I think it's important to announce your kind of intentions sometimes, and why you want to do this good stuff, just so people know what you're about, and can decide if they're interested in doing stuff with you. And so to start doing this good stuff, I'm just going to go through all this. And so not all these talks will be about God, because there's so much more to talk about. God's just an interesting part of my life that's changed, and it's the reason that I'm able to make these talks, because I'm no longer concerned about, like I said, any kind of negative ramifications of it. It's like, let's just, do good stuff. So let me see, I think if I have anything else that I wanted to talk about. Conflating it with practical. Well, yeah, I did just kind of want to say that this last post, or last video thing that I did, it was weird to even introduce myself as thinking about God now, and it's weird to just say. Lots of this stuff is just strange for me because I haven't never done it before. But I think it's a lot more instructive into how I made this choice when you look at it with pragmatism. And so that was a point I wanted to make in this, is just that the pragmatic viewpoint on things means that this is not a crazy decision. It actually makes a lot of sense, because I'm just looking at it from the effects, and I prefer the effects. So I switched into this model, and it's like, it's a very different model than before, but it's like, the better effects are better effects. That's it. Let's see. Combined, this can be done in any circumstance. Valid way of thinking. How it can be used to map out reality better by testing the results you receive. It starts to become a much more interesting viewpoint. Okay, so yeah, so that was another note that I had, is that that you can do this for anything. You can use pragmatism to evaluate the effects of anything, and you can make decisions about those things and just do them to make your life better. And if you want to have a better life, what better way to do it than just find things that you would prefer, and then figure out how to get a good grasp on those things, and then adapt yourself to them, and feel free to share. It's interesting to find out what people are doing. People are doing all kinds of amazing things these days, and now with the internet, we can see it and share it, and do our own things too. So I think hopefully this kind of discussion on pragmatism and trying to tie it in together has been interesting, or at least a little insightful for what pragmatism means, the difference of it between practical, and then also kind of how that ties into the God thing, and then maybe also just kind of showing where I'm going with this talk series, in that it's going to go into a lot of different subjects, and not just religious discussions, but all kinds of things that I think are good to do and are improving yourself. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about next time, I'm going to talk about, this next video will be on value systems and systemic thinking, just going over kind of how that stuff works, in my opinion. And then I'm going to have a talk about people you don't know. People have a lot of relationships with people that they don't know, like celebrities and mythological people, and famous people or historical people, and they don't really know them, but they have a lot of sense that they know them, like they're good friends and have information. And I think it's very interesting, kind of worth talking about. Another one on like misunderstanding and derision, how people can not understand other people and bring it down, like try to tear stuff down just because they don't get it. And really, they're not listening to the other person, because people are more right than wrong. Everybody, even people I disagree with and think that they're wrong, they're more right than wrong. Even if I think they're wrong, I've realized that they're actually more right than wrong. They have their own experiences, and they're applying them. And even if I think they're applying their experiences wrong in the end conclusion that they have, that doesn't mean that all their experiences that they're getting to that conclusion are invalid. They're actually completely valid, and I'd be well served to learn from everybody about the valid experiences that they have, because I haven't had the opportunity to learn those experiences myself, and I often never will, because everybody just lives a different life. So that'll be interesting. Another one that I'm calling Love Yourself First, Help Yourself First, then Love and Help Others, which is kind of like a concentric circles out of trying to help other people. Another one on why doesn't fiction and TV teach us things? Like, why don't we learn things from fiction and television? Like, instead of just learning kind of bogus stuff and things that aren't true and kind of silly things, why aren't we learning like real life skill things, the things that we can use to make ourselves better all the time in our fiction? Like, why don't we demand that, so that when we spend time relaxing passively, we're also learning something good? There's no reason not to. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard and be able to do both. another one that we were born to think, another one on setting up a volunteer society, and I've got a bunch of other ideas too. So that's kind of some of the things that I'm looking forward to doing with the series, and kind of give you an idea of where I'm going with it, and kind of show that this is an introduction to kind of just kind of establish what I'm doing and who I am and kind of what this is about and what I'm thinking, and again, I'll just say this is just to communicate. It's not a call to action or any kind of thing like that. I'm just kind of sharing, and I've learned a lot listening to people online and people who've recorded stuff, and now I'm just going to kind of join the conversation. So that's it. Thanks. Bye.